Welcome back to the Circle Club. Today we're talking about episode 3 of The Last of Us. These reviews are designed for people who have not played the video game but are following the TV adaptation. For those of you who have played the video game, you'll get a fresh, unbiased perspective, which is important. Now that we're 3 episodes into the TV show, the game and show may start diverging more and more. You're going to hear me say it over and over throughout this series, but this series is really about humanity, love, relationships, and this episode they really lean into it to the point we don't even really get the clickers. Like, we got that little moment in the basement with Ellie and that like dead clicker, but the clickers are really irrelevant to this story in particular in this episode. We take a break from the pandemic to explore the survival and love and solidarity, and I think, you know, when I was watching this, I was like, we get so lost, right, with our own issues and morals, perspectives, and perceptions and all that stuff, and especially in America, Democrat versus Republican, black, white, conspiracy, like all these things. I think this episode sort of plays into that with the idea of the conspiracy theorists. That whole I don't need anyone but myself sort of character in Bill, who ultimately let someone in named Frank. I think it's sort of foolish to think that, you know, you can make a show like this so close to the pandemic and not have that correlation, that connection to real things. And I think this is where the people who've played the video game may start to get a little bit upset. But, you know, as the showrunner has said over and over, this is a TV adaptation. It's a different medium which allows you to sort of do different things and play around and explore. And I gotta say, I have not played the game. I have a clip that we're gonna watch after together. I think that this is a better route to go, and you guys sound off in the comments and let me know what your thoughts are. But I think going this direction with Bill and Frank, it felt way more human. I think it's really easy, right, to make Bill this curmudgeon, angry guy who's, you know, in solitary and doesn't want to be with anyone. But I think this adds that real human element, because let's be honest, if you're alone years and years and you're like, you know, you're doing all these sort of meticulous, annoying tasks daily just to survive, when you come across someone, you're gonna have that sort of like caveman instinct to be like, oh, I don't really want this person here, you know, my space. But like, there's also this element where you're like, God, I hope this person is good. God, I hope this person is good, because you're lonely. And I think particularly after this pandemic, that's such an interesting thing to play with, because so many people, whether you're in a relationship or you live with your parents or on your own, have just been experiencing a lot of loneliness. And I think we're all sort of trying to relearn how to socialize. And I think being inside for so long, you've seen people just become so chronically online and disconnected. When people communicate with one another, there's just a disconnect, that there's a real person on the opposite side with real feelings. And, you know, I think this sometimes it translates when people get in person too. Like, we're uncomfortable, we're sort of not, we don't know what to say in those pauses, right? And I think they do such a good job, a really, really good job in this episode of exploring that sort of premise. I've heard from a couple of my friends that they didn't really explore this relationship with Frank, that it was sort of implied that something had happened and he was dead. And I think this is a good example when adaptation works better than the original, because it takes that small idea of Bill being on his own, and they use that to convey some of these larger themes of the show overall without steering too far from the overall plot. I think that's what a good adaptation does, right? Like, you know, you have point A, C, E, but that B and D to get like in between, that's not always the most important. As long as you sort of stay A, C, E, get down to Z, and like it doesn't go off the rails too much, Game of Thrones, then I think, you know, it usually typically works out pretty well. And what I really liked here is it provides a lot of the feelings that we see Joel going through with Ellie. And I'm sure we'll see Bill and Frank's story parallel Ellie and Joel down the line. Obviously not in a romantic standpoint, but from a loving relationship. You know, because Bill had this closed off nature to him, and he even sort of pins that right to Joel in his letter of like, you know, you'll come across this point where you're going to have to let someone in and like allow that to happen. And I think Ellie, because she's so young, and oh my god, Bella is such an amazing actress, right? Like, I had no idea she was only 19 years old. Like, her performance in Game of Thrones is crazy now, like when I think about it. She was like maybe 15 or 16. That's crazy that she was so good. But I think you're gonna see Bill and Frank's story parallel, where Joel starts to let her in. He gets protective, and like you can sort of see it right now, where Joel, right? I talked about it last episode, where Joel, his real reason for protecting Ellie is he has this optimism about society, but really he was doing it because Tess told him to. But I think as the relationship goes on, he's gonna start to have this fatherly partnership with her, where he feels deeply responsible for her, and like, you know, because once he hands her off, right, like he's gonna want to know what happens next and how they treat her and all these things. And it's impossible to be, as I was saying, it's impossible to be on your own for such a long time and then come across a good relationship and then let that go. And I think he sort of likes Ellie's tough nature to her, right? Like I was saying, I don't know, like someone let me know in the comments know, is Ellie actually from Boston? Because she sort of has that Boston, like, you know, chip on her shoulder kind of thing. And I think Joel has that same nature to him, being from Texas, and that's what makes them get along really well. And that's also what makes some of these scenes very funny. Like the final scene in the car, like that was just fantastic. As you all know, I didn't play the game, but my good friend sent me this clip to showcase the differences, and I really think it makes a big difference that they chose to go in this different direction. So I want to watch this together. Like, see, Ellie is way more physical, and Bill is very angry. Like, even just look at the actor's like emotions in his face. He just looks more like he's been more weathered. He's been through it. Like, he doesn't really seem as open to the idea of other people being around. Like, on it, like if you were seriously in a pandemic on your own and going through all this stuff, I don't think when you saw like a young child you wouldn't be as empathetic. That's not really realistic. I think it makes sense for the video game, right? Because you want to create these issues, and you want to create these dynamics back and forth where you're like, oh, he doesn't really like her. Like, is Joel ever gonna have to come in and sort of separate the two? But I think with a TV show, when you're using real human emotions and nature, like, I think it makes sense to have him send off that letter, but he's also still kind of got that jokey thing of like, hey, if you even make it, Joel, you idiot, and you know, you're probably the only person who made it through. And see, like, even her there, like, giving the finger, like, I think they give Ellie some of these characteristics in the show, but it's not as harsh, right? And I think it just works a lot better to me. All right, episode 3 of The Last of Us, fantastic, amazing job. Make sure you guys check out some of Matt's work that he's got, Matt on the mic. He's talking and reviewing the show, and he actually has played the game and gone through it. So if you want to get that perspective, head on over to watch his videos, and I'll be back next week as always. And as we always say, just be you. Peace.